Hi there, my name is Alex Ormson. I'm an analyst here for Turnkey Consulting, and I'm going to go through some quick fire questions about the most common issues we see with FireFighter here at Turnkey. So just a bit of background about me. I've worked on several firefighter projects in the past, specifically looking at reducing firefighter log volume for clients. So a lot of the clients that we've encountered recently have had issues keeping up with the number of logs that they've seen, with usage increasing by around 800% for some clients. This is despite the advertised benefits of the firefighter solution, which aims to streamline emergency access management. Another common issue we see across several clients is the reliance on the highest level of access when performing business as usual tasks, which results in extremely powerful IDs assigned for relatively simple tasks. So these are just some of the common issues, and throughout this presentation, we'll be going through some of those, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you with some solutions to make your workflow more efficient. So the number one question we get asked whenever working on a client project is, why are there so many firefighter logs? And the simple answer is, too many non-critical transactions are overused during firefighter sessions. So these represent a significant proportion of most firefighter sessions and create a lot of extra work for controllers. So you can see here on the right that around 63% of transactions assigned to firefighter rules were non-critical. So we found this information out by doing an extract from GRAC Act usage table. Using that same data, we found that 20% of all transactions executed during a firefighter session were non-critical. So if you took just those 20% of non-critical transactions out of those firefighter logs, you're already reducing the workload for your firefighter controller significantly by doing that. So the reason clients often put a lot of unnecessary rules in their firefighter IDs is because they have created an environment where firefighter IDs are actually necessary to finish business as usual tasks. So clients often don't want to put any risky transactions into BAU rules, which means that we have to rely on the firefighter IDs to complete these tasks. And this just means that the firefighter IDs are used far too much when they don't necessarily need to be. The solution to this is to establish a realistic risk appetite. So like I said in the previous slide, too many clients are putting all and every transaction into their firefighter IDs when they don't necessarily need to. So it's impossible to remove all risk from an environment, and it's completely unhelpful to put all risky transactions into firefighter rules and have that as their only access for teams, particularly if they need those transactions to perform everyday tasks. Therefore, it's necessary to accept that some level of risk will exist within BAU rules and to then put appropriate controls in place, such as ensuring strong segregation of duties. This strikes the appropriate balance between allowing users to complete their everyday tasks in a risk-mitigated environment and keeping only the essential transactions into firefighter rules. This will then lead on to the redesign of the firefighter rules. So once this risk appetite has been established, you can now redesign the rules to reflect this. It's a good idea to have clear documentation about what each firefighter rule contains and ensure teams have easy access to this. We'll talk a little bit more about that at a later stage. And finally, creating and maintaining established practices surrounding firefighter usage. So it's up to the firefighter owners and controllers to establish clear, secure practices and ensure that team members do not take unnecessary liberties when it comes to firefighter IDs. For example, establishing a precedent that firefighter logs should not be used for basic transactions. It's important to ensure team members know to use non-critical transactions within their own user and authorizations, which will help lower the number and size of logs created. So think back to that 20% I talked about earlier. It's up to the owners and the controllers to create a work culture which sees firefighter usage as to be used only when required and if absolutely necessary, rather than to perform everyday tasks. Another big cause behind the creation of so many firefighter logs is that an appropriate workflow hasn't been created, or if it has been created, it's not maintained within the client site. So I'm going to walk you through an example of a recent client engagement I was on in which the client side had decided to actually hire a third-party team to approve their firefighter logs because they just had far too many to process. So the process for them and their workflow was that the firefighter owner would approve the ID, the user creates the log was then sent to an external team where the log was either approved or there was a discrepancy or an issue found. If this was the case, the log was then sent to the firefighter controller, and it was their responsibility to then investigate that issue. They would either contact the firefighter user and approve the log or continue the investigation further. So as you can see, this is convoluted, time-consuming, and potentially really expensive. If you have so many firefighter logs that you need to hire an external team for it, the cost of that can really rack up. There are several other issues created by relying on an external third party to review the logs. It makes the approval process a lot longer than necessary. With some of our clients, we saw that it would take sometimes months to approve firefighter logs. By including this extra process, the internal team, and specifically, the firefighter controller, has very limited oversight about how the logs are being approved. This could result as well as in inconsistencies in how the logs are approved and increases the risk of either false positives or false negatives occurring within the logs. Particularly bad because it is the firefighter controller's responsibility to make sure that there is a high standard of which these logs are being audited. Thirdly, the firefighter controller still needs oversight of the third party's process, which in itself creates further work in terms of administration, spot checking, meaning the solution to actually reduce the workload creates work for the controller anyway. Including a third party to review the logs just further complicates the process and makes it longer than necessary. And it doesn't necessarily tackle the issue of creating firefighter logs, but rather siphons the workload for another team to deal with. But what we noticed was that the controller still had to do spot checks, still had to do investigation. So really, it wasn't a solution. It was more kicking the can down the road kind of situation. So our solution was to create separation between the firefighter owner controller. It's strongly recommended that there is a segregation of duty within the firefighter process. Owners and controllers should have a degree of independence. In this workflow that I've created here, you can see that firefighter controllers and owners have separate, clearly defined rules, creating required segregation of duties. So it's really, really important within your organization that the owner and the controller know specifically what their roles are and that they uphold those responsibilities. It's the responsibility of both the owner and controller to establish and maintain these boundaries and to create a secure environment which fulfills audit guidelines and encourages a culture within their team of only using firefighter IDs when absolutely necessary. This can also assist with the efficiency of reviewing logs. So if we work with several clients where the logs are not investigated, like I said, for several months, this can be mitigated by creating a clear workflow with established divisions of responsibility. So in the previous example with the third party, it's not clear who is looking at what logs, what their speed of work is, what standards they are using. Whereas if you keep that in-house and everyone is clearly aware of whose responsibility it is to assign the IDs and to investigate them, then that creates a much cleaner and efficient workflow. Another really common mistake that I have seen when working on firefighter projects is that it's really unclear what access each firefighter ID is actually assigned. So I already mentioned this earlier on in the presentation, but I think it's really worth reiterating the importance of having clear documentation of what level of access each firefighter provides. So there are often no guidelines for choosing firefighter IDs during specific instances. So we found that clients do not make it clear what ID has particular access, which results in users requesting highly sensitive IDs with powerful rules as a way of ensuring that they will have the necessary access to complete whatever tasks they need to do. So for example, a user will request an ID they know has SAP all to ensure that they can complete whatever task they need to do. So this lack of clarity, increases the risks and is unnecessary as you can potentially give extremely sensitive access to complete a fairly low-risk task. And ultimately, this increases the work for both the owners and the controller. So if a firefighter user requests highly sensitive rule and it is unclear why, because the request suggests that they are performing low-risk transactions, either the owner must investigate the request, whereby they contact the user for further context and reasoning, creating more work for the owner in the end. So you can see here in this workflow, the user requests highly sensitive access, the owner investigates the request, and the owner must contact the user, who might take a while to get back to them, and then it's either approved or rejected, creating more work for the owner. Or if the owner automatically approves it, it creates more work for the firefighter controller. So the owner approves, the log's created, and the controller investigates why they've got so much access for such a simple task. The solution to this is to prepare a firefighter process document that covers the end-to-end process with specifications clearly determined for users in order to help them understand the type of IDs they should be requesting. So the guide should include all current business scenarios as a reference for users so that there is consistency among all users on what ID to request for specific instances. Approvers should be given guidance on which IDs require advanced vetting and which IDs should have more restricted access. So they should also have a checklist and guidance on how to challenge back on high-tier requests by encouraging the approval of more restricted firefighter accounts instead. So at the end of the day, the assignment of highly sensitive rules should be reserved for extreme circumstances, and things like rule updates and cutover tasks will not need as sensitive access. Another issue that I've noticed with a few of the clients I've worked with is that there are issues between the firefighter owners and controllers, usually because one party has a disproportionate amount of work in comparison to the other. And one of the big causes behind this is that owners do not question users on their request access. So often owners do not challenge the requests for firefighter IDs, which have really sensitive rules. So as I've just discussed, firefighter users often request IDs with the most powerful rules assigned to ensure that they have the required access when they do gain approval so that they can log on and complete their tasks. So for example, we saw with one client that there were around 11 sessions per week where SAP rules were assigned to users even though they're through their firefighter ID. This was even in the cases where they didn't require such high level of access and were just doing fairly low-risk firefighter rule activities. So this establishes a dangerous precedent whereby users can easily gain access to powerful transactions and authorizations. It also places a huge strain on controllers who need to spend time retrospectively investigating if this high level of access was truly necessary for that user. Furthermore, if this issue is combined with a weak review process, this creates significant opportunity for users to perform unnecessary or even illegitimate activities. So not only does this create issues for the controllers, who will need to spend time investigating this access, but it could also create issues when going through audits. So if we just have a look here, what happens usually is that the firefighter user easily gains access to their ID, there's an inefficient log review process, and that just creates an increased opportunity to perform illegitimate activities. So not only are you creating more work, but you're actually creating more risk in your environment by having this one-sided review process. So the solution is to ensure that there is shared responsibility between users, owners, and controllers. So organizations need to maintain stringent expectations when firefighter usage is involved. So the firefighter user should be aware of the different levels of access available with each firefighter ID. Like I mentioned before, having clear documentation which states which business scenarios require specific IDs. In turn, the firefighter owner should be responsible for challenging requests for highly sensitive access. There should be a strong culture of shared responsibility between the users, owners, and the controllers. Finally, the controllers should challenge any unusual activity, including if and when users fail to use appropriate reason codes, and if owners approve ID requests which are far too powerful for the activities executed. It's really not up to one party. It should be the responsibility of the team to ensure that each member knows the sensitivity of this, the audit implications, and making sure that everyone is working as an efficient team to ensure that everything is as risk-free and compliant as possible. The solutions that I have provided so far are fairly low cost. They will only really require time from your team to implement the solutions and effort to maintain them. But recently on an engagement, we were asked if the firefighter approval process can be automated. Now, I'm just going to caveat that with, this is not to replace the solutions that I've already discussed throughout this presentation. If this is something that you are interested in with your team, this should be done in tandem with the other solutions to encourage a compliant and efficient workflow. But the short answer is yes, to an extent, the process can be automated. The process doesn't aim to remove the requirement of a trained individual checking logs, but will reduce the number of low-risk logs a firefighter controller has to analyze. So theoretically, this can create a more efficient workflow, meaning the controller can focus on processing firefighter logs with high-risk transactions. So the aim is to automate the approval of logs in which it is clear that the transactions that were executed are low risk, fairly simple and routine tasks, such as rule redesign, things like that. So we would need to check that firefighter logs in the past to determine what transactions are most commonly used during sessions. As I've already mentioned in this presentation, a majority of transaction codes used during the sessions are non-critical. These should be the target of the automation process, and it's important to look at historical data and understand which transactions are commonly executed which have a low risk. You should check with the relevant SAP tables to determine what functional areas are high risk, and these are not to be automated. So this will support the process of determining commonly used low-risk transactions and provide clarity on what should and shouldn't be part of the automation process. So for example, table GRAC Func Act will be really useful for this process. This will also confirm which transactions will require more scrutiny and therefore should not be automated. It's important that automation is combined with regular spot checking to ensure this tooling works as expected and that high-risk transactions are not included within the automation process. Also, it is good practice that even if you are implementing automation for low-risk transactions, that there is a trained professional who is regularly going through those logs and making sure through a manual process that everything is as expected. So a good idea would be to use a reporting tool which is automatically updated by data from SAP tables when firefighter logs are created and summarizes the logs in a user-friendly way. So this can be analyzed by the firefighter controller at their discretion. That can be done daily, weekly, or on a monthly basis. It can really be personalized. So for example, Power BI is a really useful tool which can be used to consolidate the information and is compatible with SAP. So again, we'd just like to reiterate, this is just for low-risk transactions and shouldn't be used to completely replace the owner-controller process, and it shouldn't be replacing the workflow that I've discussed throughout this, but it can be used in tandem with those things. If you want any further information about this, feel free to ask Turnkey, and we can certainly assist on that. And that finalizes my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you learned something and that you found some of the information useful. If you'd like to get in touch about any of the solutions I spoke about, that is my email, alex.armson@turnkeyconsulting.com. Thanks very much and have a good day.